Hey everyone, so today I'm going to be installing a JLT air oil separator, also commonly referred to as a catch can, on my 2020 Raptor. Now this specific model fits a multitude of Ford engines, Raptor 3.5s, regular 3.5s, 2.7s, 5.0s, so it's a pretty large demographic of Ford trucks this fits. Now if you've been doing some research on these are basically going to catch the oily mist that builds up in the crankcase that would normally go through the PCV system and get recycled into the engine. The problem is it gums up the engine, the intake, the valves, so you really want to separate this away and not just have this go back into the engine itself. This is especially important on the turbo motors. They have a lot more blow-by than the naturally aspirated engines do, so this is definitely a good and very simple installation that can really help out the health of your engine. Now when you get this in the box, comes in a simple plain brown box with the instructions. They're pretty thorough. They go through it. They have some pretty good pictures. They also show all the various engines from the different years and different models and how it's going to be oriented in the engine bay. So it's a pretty good set of instructions. When you get everything out of the box and you open up the parts box, 2 bolts and 2 clips. These are for the mount that the oil separator is going to sit on, 2 machine screws that actually mount the separator to the mount, and then this plastic plug here. Most people will not use this. This is for certain 5.0 supercharged applications, so the overwhelming majority of people will not be using that. You also have the mount that goes on the battery tray itself. The air oil separator with the hoses comes pre-installed from the factory just like this, so it's basically ready to go. I got it in black. I think it looks better in the engine bay. As black, it blends in. It's also available in a silver color. Now, as far as tools you're going to need, don't be too intimidated by the drill. Really not a big deal. You're going to have to drill 1/4 inch hole for the mount. It's very simple, very clean, not a big deal. You're going to need a 10mm socket, both for if you have an engine that has an engine cover on it, that cover has to come off. And you'll also need it for the bolts for the mount on this as well. A number 2 Phillips head screwdriver for the machine screws that mount the air oil separator to the mount itself, and then sometimes a flathead screwdriver is better, makes it a little bit easier just to get the factory hose off. Step stool is also a good idea. You kind of have to reach pretty far into this engine bay, and it's a little bit tough if you're standing on the ground. So if you have an engine cover, just those 2 bolts on the front have to come off, and then you also have to take the oil cap off as well. I would just put it right back once you get the cover off so you don't lose it and drop something into the engine by accident. And then as far as that hole that you have to drill, you're basically going to remove this factory mount here and use this one hole as a guide. So you use this for the 1 bolt. You'll put the mount on just to line it up and drill another hole for the second one. So that's the only drilling that's required. So it's not really a big deal. You're not even going to notice it if you ever really take it off. So it's not a major modification that needs to be made. So I'll go ahead and get this engine cover off and we'll get started. All right, now with the engine cover off, obviously we can see everything a lot better. While you have the engine cover off, if it's dirty under here, now it's probably a good time to clean it. This is the hose we're going to be taking off. I already went ahead and just popped the clips off just to make this a little bit easier. There is a blue tab on here. You're basically going to move this with your finger or the screwdriver if it's a little bit hard. I recommend popping this one off. When you do, you can rotate it around. You have access to the clip on this side. You push it to open it up, and it comes right off. So real easy to take off, only takes a few seconds. Now before I go ahead and get started, if you've ever wondered why most of these are passenger side and not driver side, typically with Ford engines, they mount their PCV system, their passenger side one, behind the throttle body. A lot of other Ford vehicles, the driver's side is in front of it. The passenger side behind the throttle body is almost always under vacuum, so that's why you typically get the overwhelming majority of the oil that comes up through these on the passenger side. This is the same thing with my GT350R. It's behind the throttle body, so this is basically always under vacuum if you're not at full throttle, and it's basically it basically pulls that oily mist up through the system. So that's why you almost exclusively see them on the passenger side on most of these Ford engines. So I'm going to go and get the mount lined up here, and then I'm going to start to drill it so we can get that mounted and then get everything correctly routed. All right, with the mount in place, I just put the 1 bolt in just to secure it in place. The 1/4 inch bit goes through. It just nicks the edges of the walls a tiny bit, but it acts as a really nice guide, and if you make this bolt tight enough, the bracket won't move when you're drilling it. You can obviously take it back out and just mark the hole, but it works really well like this, using it as a guide. So like I said, I just left the one bolt in place. Now all I just have to do, loosen this up a little bit, put the other bolt in place, and then this will be fully mounted. Just make sure if you're drilling it in place, you make sure this wire is out of the way. You don't want to accidentally nick that. And then once I get this fully mounted, we'll be able to mount the catch can to the mount and then route it to the engine. All right, with the mount fully installed, both screws, I ended up bumping up this rear hole to a 3/8. A little bit easier to get the spring clip on there. It was a little bit resilient with the 1/4 inch. So bumped up the 3/8, went in nice, tightened it down, very easy. Those 2 machine screws go on the top. That's that number 2 Phillips head. This holds the catch can to the mount itself. When you're around the hoses, just want to try to give it a nice smooth path so it's not no hard bends, no kinks. Just try to make sure it's not rubbing anything. The 90-degree coupling goes on the back and the 45 goes on the front. So I tuck this under here. It has a little bit less stress if it's tucked underneath. And when you push them on all the way, you get a nice definitive click. So just make sure they're both pressed on nicely. Take your time, make sure that they're nicely routed. The wires aren't rubbing anything. They're not going to get pinch anything. They're away from any really hot areas. Everything's pretty well insulated in here the way it should be. But just take your time so you have a nice routing. And then just make sure that this can is threaded in all the way. So that's basically wraps up the install, and then I just have to put the engine cover back on. If you have a truck with an engine cover, those 2 10mm bolts, and just take the oil cap off when it goes on and off. And that's pretty much it. So I would recommend checking this every few hundred miles just to kind of gauge how quickly this thing is filling up, depending on the amount of mileage you're doing and your driving style. Obviously, you drive with a little bit of a heavier foot, this is probably going to fill up a little bit quicker. But you definitely want to keep an eye on this thing. You do not want this thing to fill up. If this thing overflows, it's basically just going to route it right back into the air intake, and you don't want to do that. So that's the whole idea, so it doesn't get in there. But just keep an eye on it. It just threads on and off. Really simple, very easy to check. Only takes a few minutes, and you should pretty much be checking it every time you check your oil until you have a pretty good idea of how quickly this thing is and is not filling up. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and this was very informative and helped you out if you're looking for one of these. Thanks for watching.